Sometimes I have to remind myself that it's a mindfulness bell. It's not the school teacher ringing for the next class. Let's see if this works. So here we are. We've made it this far. Sometimes last year we were wondering, right? I find myself really kind of appreciating this time of year in our hemisphere. Anyway, the dark, the quiet, and the sense of wanting to come in, the warm hearth feeling, and that appreciation for that kind of post-holiday quietude, which is really can be such a gift for us. And I was noticing when I was looking back through a file cabinet full of notes that I often seem to be a guest teacher just about this time of year. So there must be something that I really like about speaking about a fresh start. So tonight's talk on a fresh start will be focus a little bit on those ways that we try to make resolutions for change and those things that we really can count on to support us in our attending to ourselves. We'll take a look at some of the ordinary evaluations that are part of our teachings about how we base our lives and what we use to judge ourselves. How many of you have made New Year's resolutions? Is there a sense that what's the point because we know that by, a month from now we won't be keeping them anyway? Or is there a sense of something about that business of resolution that feels oppressive, like setting ourselves up for failure? So this will be a little bit of what we'll investigate tonight. I appreciated seeing some hands. And I found for myself that when I was thinking about New Year's resolutions, what was really occurring was a shift in the word resolution to speak about aspirations. This is the language that I was using to myself, and so I'll bring some of that in tonight as we talk. If we try to make those kinds of resolutions that we've all heard about in our culture, like save more money, or lose weight or gain weight, or get more exercise, or get a better job, or get to be more patient, or be kinder to our family, a lot of times we are basing those resolutions on self-judgment. And there is really a lot that goes into that psychologically in our culture. We do like the feeling of a fresh start. And we do like the sense of stopping, even though it's arbitrary. We know it's arbitrary, right? We know there's really just an agreed upon New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, so we'll all kind of be on the same page. In fact, I heard that the people in Samoa did not have a December 30th this year. So that made it very clear that it's an agreed upon situation. They decided to shift their calendar so that they would be more in sync with their Asian trading partners and a little bit, I guess, less in sync with their European trading partners than they had in the past. Somehow this year that has just passed, discouragement and disillusionment and despair seem to be more predominant. A lot of things that I looked at sort of looked like this front page of the Washington Post business section. That was a bust. Could 2012 be better? And I had some friends of my own family saying, it's got to get better than this. Sometimes our idea of a fresh start is it's got to get better. Congress has got to recover what it means to really provide leadership. The economy has to improve. America has got to retain its global standing. The change in Arab countries has just got to move in the direction of democracy. And this political election must bring us some better leadership and some better choices. Somebody has to be able to fix things. We want that known security, that somebody out there can fix it. And it's all too easy to accept the notion that if that doesn't happen and we don't seem to have much control over it out there, then we turn inward and we decide we'll try to see if we can exert some control over ourselves and fix ourselves. And so often then that's where our New Year's resolutions, quote unquote, come. As Sharon was talking about last week, about the way in which we get caught in this trap of self-judgment and comparing ourselves to everybody else, and how essentially unloving and uncaring we can be towards ourselves. And really highlighting in her talk last week the importance and the value of attending to that which is good and true in ourselves and supporting ourselves with love and care. And this is why I don't use the word resolution. It's just mine. I encourage everybody to think about words that work for you. But it works for me to speak about taking stock, looking at where things are now as aspiration for change. It's important to sit with our deepest intention. And it's important to understand what supports our deepest intention. In Buddhist teachings, these ordinary standards of judgment are called the 8 worldly concerns, or the 8 worldly dharmas. And they are gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute, and pleasure and pain. And I want to just share with you a little bit of a teaching that came from Detsuma Tenzin Palmo from a retreat she taught this summer for Tricycle. She says, so much of our life is concerned with attracting what looks to us like the good side, like gaining things and having a good reputation. People praising us and saying good things to us, and especially pleasure. And so we reach out and we grasp for this, thinking that therein lies our happiness, and at the same time striving to avoid the opposites, loss and criticism and a bad reputation and anything we regard as painful. Our lives are concerned with trying to attract what looks to us like something which will give us happiness and pleasure, and to avoid anything which we regard as something which will give us pain, which will be difficult for us. So this is an interesting phenomenon, she says. She says, so the point is that we think if we can keep running fast enough so that we only experience the seeming positive side of the 8 worldly concerns, and we avoid the unpleasant side, that would give us a happy, fulfilled life. Our society encourages that. If we experience loss and criticism and a bad reputation or pain in any form, somehow we have failed. Somehow we haven't managed to juggle the pieces well enough, because a person who is successful only gains, only has praise lavished on them. Everybody thinks they're great. Everybody writes only good things, and they experience endless pleasure. That is a successful life. In that scenario, we would naturally have enduring happiness. But it doesn't work. It doesn't really work. You can see that. I'm sure you've noticed that by now. One example that occurred to me was that for years and years I have resolved every year to be more patient and more kind. Well, these are wholesome qualities, and of course they're qualities to be cultivated. So the aspiration seems good. But the pressures is the confusion that has been in the mind about how these qualities come about. I've thought that being more patient and being more kind was something that I needed to do. I needed to make happen. and that worldly dharma of praise and blame, the comparing mind, the judgment that makes life either good or bad. Actually, I really secretly wanted to think very well of myself, and I wanted everybody else to notice what a patient, kind person Jackie is. Actually, I wouldn't mind reaching sainthood after I die. That was probably part of why that kind of resolution didn't serve to nourish or to nurture or to sustain me. We have, even in our meditation practice, as we did tonight, we're encouraged in our cultivation of mindfulness to stop and to begin again. And whether you interrupt your sitting with a bell or not, or whether you sit for 2 hours at a time, it's part of the skillfulness of developing practice to know when you've been wandering off somewhere. And very often what you're wandering into is that sense of something isn't right and I need to fix it, or I have to have control over this. And just drop it. Notice and just drop it, and just to start again. Let's see if I can find here. What motivates us to a fresh start if it is not the judging, comparing mind that is so painful? Sometimes we think we have to have that sort of inner direction and inner discipline in order to change. So what motivates us? How do we support the aspiration to be awake? There is a necessary element of trust. And tonight we're going to explore, through using some traditional teachings from our Buddhist tradition, how we notice and rest in what we can trust. I would invite you first, in your own reflection, to ask yourself the question, what can you trust of your own deepest experience? Can you trust your capacity to be kind? Can you trust that it's possible for you to be patient? Can you trust that you know how to love, to be open-hearted, to offer to others? Can you trust your longing for spiritual freedom, your longing to wake up, not to be wrapped around that grasping or that pushing away or that confusion and denial? Can you trust your capacity for critical thinking, your capacity for a discerning wisdom? Just now, in noticing what is true, just by sitting here tonight, you've supported some intention. You have opened to the possibility of something new happening tonight. And maybe you'll go home and say, well, that wasn't much, or I wish I'd stayed here where it was warm, or something like that. But you might also leave tonight with a sense of something has happened for you yourself, and for you in this community. Something new and something fresh and something vital is being nurtured here right now. We don't have to change and fix ourselves by some standard of praise and blame, or fame and disrepute, but rather to open clearly to what we can trust of our own deepest experience. Sharon Salzberg, who has written a very fine book on faith, and one of the books that has meant as much to me as any, tells this little story about herself and her meditation practice early on. Sharon says, "What do you trust?" I remember having a great deal of difficulty with my practice at one point, and my teacher, U Pandita, said to me, "You just sit and walk. The Dharma will take care of the rest." I was trying too hard to make the practice work, and the faith that came from simply trusting that the practice would work all by itself has been tremendously helpful for me. Sharon Salzberg, as you probably know, is one of the primary teachers in our Western Buddhist tradition, who's been inspiring us all for 30-some years. And to know that we can trust that the Dharma will take care of itself can begin to shift into that new space for us. I was listening to a talk by Sharda Rogel, who's a Spirit Rock teacher, and Sharda says, "But sitting with our own mind is a challenging thing. To have to sit and witness the craziness of our own lives. The first thing that we see, the first thing we become aware of is how out of control our mind is." Have you noticed that? I still remember how startled I was, me, Jackie, still remember how startled I was when one of my teachers pronounced this at a meditation retreat. "Can you see that you cannot control your mind?" That was actually a life-changing question, because I think it was the first time I had really been able to let go. It's like, oh, it's okay. My mind must be like everybody else's. It's just crazy and out of control. Can I trust the Dharma to do the work? It's usual to find some anxiety when we begin a meditation practice. And actually, even if we practice for a number of years, there will be moments when, or days, weeks, when the anxiety about what we're doing and whether it's actually working or helpful is really high. We're moving into unfamiliar ways of experiencing. We're moving into the uncertainty of change. We say we want change, but there's a part of us that really wants things to be known and secure and stable, right? So trusting the Dharma means also trusting that things will change, seeing the truth of that. Did you notice how in your 30 minutes tonight, how your mind changed a bunch of times? I'm quite sure that happened. I don't know in what direction, but it happens. Change happens. We're actually moving in this meditation practice into what is called groundlessness, where we don't have the kind of foundation that we can say, this is it is fixed, we're standing on this, these are the teachings, these are the beliefs, and if you swallow this whole, you will be an enlightened being. We don't have that. This is not the way the Buddha taught. This is not the way we see through our own deepest experience of practice that things develop. But there are aspects that we can trust. Each of us has both the challenge and the opportunity in this spiritual path to explore for ourselves what is trustworthy. Theistic religions place an ultimate trust in a divine being. And Buddhism doesn't teach of a divine being, but rather teaches us to trust presence itself. Again, Sharon Salzberg says, in my understanding, whether faith is connected to a deity or not, its essence lies entrusting ourselves to discover the deepest truths on which we can rely. Trusting ourselves to discover the deepest truths on which we can rely. So how do we do that? I said there are some foundational pieces. They're not beliefs, but they are aspects that support us in our experience. In the religious Buddhist tradition, there's a very beautiful ritual called taking refuge. It's practiced in Buddhist temples and centers as a way of affirming one's commitment to this Buddhist path, to this particular path of awakening. Usually a meditation retreat of any duration will begin with taking refuge and with the precepts. And while it doesn't seem fitting to offer this formal ceremony in this setting here tonight, I suggest that we might sit together for a bit with these refuges for our experience and our contemplation. When we see that the outer world and the eight worldly dharmas are just so unreliable, we may sense the possibility for reliance and our commitment to awakening presence. And the way I'd like to share this taking refuges with you is something that I learned from one of my major teachers, Tara Brach. Tara is, as I understand it, writing a book on taking refuge. And early on in my meditation practice, I was fortunate to be with her, where each year, at the beginning of the new year, taking refuges is a part of the practice of that community. And Tara speaks about taking refuge, teaches about taking refuge in ways that makes it very accessible to us. So in what I'm sharing with you, I'd like you to have a sense of that larger Sangha that we are connected to and the other teachers. This is not something that I just dreamed up or thought of on my own. The traditional phrases for taking refuge go like this. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Now, what might that mean? Starting with, I take refuge in the Dharma. What does Dharma mean? The practice. Dharma might mean, in the Buddha Dharma sense, this practice. In the largest sense of Dharma, it means all of life. Shoryam Trungpa says there's no secular and sacred in life in these teachings. All of life is there to teach us truth. So we look at taking refuge in the Dharma as not leaving out any part of our experience, but learning to be open and accept whatever is arising as a part of our path, as a piece of our teaching and our opportunity for developing, for coming really close to remembering who we truly are. If we were to think about, I take refuge in the Dharma as an outer teaching, we would take refuge in these particular things that we study and we practice in this way. And in an inner sense, it means taking refuge in trusting that we can be present, fully present with whatever's happening. So let's try that just a little bit now. If you will, if you'd like to experience taking refuge in the Dharma, let yourself sit comfortably. You can close your eyes if you'd like. And let come to mind something that is happening for you in your work or home life that's challenging. But actually you just wish it wouldn't be this way. See if it's possible in And this, don't pick the hardest thing you've ever had to deal with, but something kind of moderate or a little less than 100% difficult, so you can work with it. See if it's possible in a relaxed and open way to allow this challenging experience. Let it come to mind. Feel a sense of it in your body. And what is it like to let it be there, to entrust yourself to these waves on the ocean of existence? What is it like to open? Can I be with this in this moment? Ajahn Sumedho uses the phrase, it's like this. You might notice the ordinary mind coming up with ideas about how to fix it and what to do about it. See if you can just let those fade like clouds passing in the sky. And see, is it possible to relax, to be open, and to investigate this place that's tough? It's really just two questions when we sit down to meditate. What is happening right now? And can I be with it? Thank you. A second phrase, a second taking refuge is taking refuge in the Sangha. And the word Sangha, as I understand it, was used in the Buddha's time to talk about the ordained monks and nuns that were part of the religious community. That usage has expanded as lay people like us have been taught to meditate, have come to the teachings and practices in quite a large community kind of sense. And perhaps in its largest meaning, Sangha means the community of all beings. The outer Sangha is us. Look around, meet your Sangha. And recognize that if we were not here for each other, where would we each be? Every Tuesday night when we show up here, we trust that somebody else will show up. So far, I've been coming here, I think, 6.5 years. I've never been here on a Tuesday night at 7:30, and there was no one else here. This is a Sangha we can count on. We can count on having companions on this path. People whose intention to open to what is true, to support the deepest aspirations for waking up, to relate with each other with openness and care, even when it's difficult. And believe you me, sometimes it's difficult. We're not always nice, but we have a commitment with each other. Taking refuge in the Sangha. The inner Sangha means that same kind of relatedness to yourself. About 100 years ago, when I was in practice as a psychotherapist, I learned some techniques that were from Jungian psychology that were actually very helpful, where psychologically people were taught to think about different aspects of their being as different parts of themselves. And maybe there was a part that had this kind of judgment, and there was a part that felt like a little girl being criticized, and a very competent part, and so forth and so forth. And sometimes when I think about the inner Sangha, that's what comes to mind. All these aspects that I cannot pin down and say, well, that one's Jackie. Well, what about this one? Oh, that must be who Jackie is. Well, what about that? Sometimes she shows up like this. The loving relatedness that we develop as a part of our practice, that again Sharon was teaching about last week and we've been practicing with, is what it means to take refuge in the Sangha in that inner sense. Appreciating all the aspects of how we show up. So if you'd like to experience that for a little bit, you might again like to close your eyes and bring to mind someone that matters to you, some being. It doesn't have to be a live person. It may be a pet. It could be someone who has passed on, someone that matters a lot. Someone with whom you feel a very strong sense of connection, and that whole felt sense of connection is known to you in your body. Tara uses the phrase, a field of tenderness around you and this person you care about, or this being that matters so much to you. See if you can experience yourself in that field of tenderness. Who are you when you're in this field? Can you trust? Can you take refuge? That you have this capacity of loving relatedness that you can trust. You may open your eyes now. So, taking refuge in the Dharma, the truth of all things. Taking refuge in the Sangha, loving relatedness. Taking refuge in the Buddha. Now this was challenging for me for a while because I didn't think I wanted to be a Buddhist. So, just speaking to that, let me say that I came to understand that the Buddha, and by now my household is all filled with Buddha statues, and people that were there working in my house and a few months ago said, wow, you've got a lot of Buddhas around here. Yeah. And it led to quite a conversation about his experience, the painter's experience with meditation. Taking refuge in the Buddha, as I understand it on the outer level, is taking refuge in any being of which the Buddha is an example for many, of an enlightened being, a human being who was able in his own life to touch and live in pure awareness. For you, that might be some other spiritual being. It doesn't necessarily have to be Buddha. But look to what icon or representation of awareness itself is important to you. Can you trust that? Let it belong to you. And then begin to sense that you have, in fact, that same capacity for awakening. One of the things that for me is so inspiring about the Buddha's story is that he never said, I'm a god and I'm here, I've already waked up and I'm here to show you guys how it's done. But rather, in fact, lived as a human being, a spiritual seeker, but definitely, but as a human being whose teachings and practices developed out of his own experience. So if you'd like, for a few moments as we come near the close of tonight, see if it's possible for you right now to rest in an open spaciousness, an awareness of all that is, that includes anything about your life that is there, that doesn't get caught up in a cognitive trying to understand it, because it really can't be understood and it can't be put into words without doing it an injustice. But a sense of resting in spacious awareness. There's no limits. This awakeness that is our true nature. This awakeness that includes sound and space and sensations and any experience that arises in the vast boundarylessness of awareness. So we take refuge in truth, we take refuge in love, and we take refuge in pure awareness itself. The Christian mystic Mechthild of Magdeburg says this: a fish cannot drown in water. A bird does not fall in air. In the fire of its own making, gold doesn't vanish. The fire brightens. Each creature God made must live in its own true nature. How could I resist my nature that lives for oneness with God? Thank you very much. Happy New Year.